The crash of Air India Flight 171, for months treated as an inevitable accident, has proven to be far more disturbing than initially imagined. What seemed like a common aviation tragedy now raises serious suspicions of deliberate sabotage. Seconds after takeoff from Ahmedabad bound for London Gatwick, the fuel supply to the engines was intentionally cut off, leading to the simultaneous shutdown of both engines and condemning the aircraft while still at low altitude. Investigations confirmed that the fuel switches were manually turned off. The great mystery that remains is no longer how, but who and why. The discovery shocked investigators and completely changed the understanding of the disaster that killed 230 passengers and 12 crew members, as well as victims on the ground, when it struck a residential dormitory. For months, the world grew accustomed to hearing about the same 32 seconds of terror, repeated ad nauseum by television news programs, followed by official statements of sorrow and silence. However, this simplified narrative concealed crucial details. On June 12, 2025, shortly after 1 p.m., a 17-year-old teenager, Aryan Asari, was casually recording the skies over Ahmedabad when he noticed something strange: a jet flying too low. His video, recorded instinctively, became the only visual record of India's worst air disaster in over a decade. The images captured absolute chaos, culminating in a single instant of extreme violence. Rescue teams arrived quickly, but found a devastated scene, with destroyed buildings, active fires, and screams everywhere. The possibility of survival seemed non-existent. Yet, against all logic, a man was found alive. Vishwashkumar Ramesh, a British citizen of Indian origin, was rescued conscious but severely injured, with extensive burns, multiple fractures, a collapsed lung, and a severe concussion. He was rushed to a trauma center and became an unexpected symbol of survival amidst a tragedy that now raises far darker questions than it can answer. For investigators, the question was immediate and incessant. How had he survived? How, in an accident that obliterated the aircraft and took the lives of everyone else on board, did a single man manage to survive? The man who should not have lived. According to the preliminary investigation, the aircraft's fuselage ruptured catastrophically near the root of the left wing, exactly where the emergency exit was located next to seat 11A, the seat assigned to Vishwashkumar Ramesh. This was not a simple door failure, but a violent tear in the aircraft structure. Investigators theorized that the section containing rows 10 and 11 was partially ejected from the main body upon impact, falling into a waterlogged field a few meters away. The soft, damp ground acted as an improvised shock absorber, absorbing much of the lethal deceleration. A grim detail emerged in the official report. The occupant of seat 11B, immediately to Ramesh's left, was his brother, Ajay. Ramesh. He did not survive. The forces that severed the fuselage at that precise point were fatal for Ajay, while simultaneously granting Vishwashkumar a brutal and improbable chance to live. For 72 hours, Vishwashkumar remained unable to provide a coherent account, sedated and recovering from severe trauma. When authorities finally spoke to him, his memories were fragmented, marked by shock and confusion. He remembered the sudden loss of engine noise, the plane tilting and then spinning violently. His next memory was of waking up in a damp, smoky field, surrounded by pockets of fire, with no idea how he had escaped the wreckage. His survival was not heroic. Her death was determined by her seat, the cushioning effect of the waterlogged ground, and the tragic loss of her brother beside her. Researchers saw her survival as a crucial piece of information, pinpointing the exact location of the structural failure. As the investigation analyzed the passenger list, last-minute changes and unusual coincidences raised a darker and more disturbing question. India Flight 171 focused first on the aircraft and the moment of impact. As the investigation progressed, the Bureau of Aviation Accident Investigation turned to a more human element: the passenger list. What would normally be just a simple list of names and nationalities became a source of growing intrigue. A detailed review revealed 3 anomalies among the 169 Indian, 53 British, 7 Portuguese, and 1 Canadian passengers. The first involved a figure of political importance. Seat 2A had been granted to Sri Vijay Rupani, former Chief Minister of the state of Gujarat. Although high-profile individuals occasionally travel on commercial flights, his presence introduced security considerations and protocols that investigators could not ignore. Coincidence or not, his reserved nature added a layer of complexity to the investigation. The second anomaly involved last-minute cancellations. The Nanabawa family, confirmed passengers, were unfortunately part of these changes, but they were not alone. Airline records showed an unusually high number of cancellations and seat adjustments for that flight, including 3 senior executives from a multinational company specializing in secure government communications. The 3 canceled their premium economy tickets less than 10 hours before departure. Officially, the reason given was corporate policy. Still, in the context of the disaster, such routine explanations seemed strangely out of the ordinary. The third anomaly concerned the concentration of foreigners, especially the 53 British passengers. Among them were business travelers and professionals with security clearances, reflecting the strategic ties between the United Kingdom and India. One individual, a data security analyst for a major British defense contractor, was traveling alone in economy class, highlighting the unusual mix of profiles aboard an otherwise routine flight. These details transformed the passenger list from a simple roll call into a web of questions. Investigators emphasized that there was no evidence linking these anomalies to the accident, but the patterns could not be ignored. The unusual cancellations, high-profile passengers, and concentration of sensitive professionals raised a disturbing possibility. Did someone know that disaster was coming? While these questions hung over the investigation, attention turned to the only witness who recorded the event on video. However, instead of bringing clarity, the authorities' meeting with the teenage cameraman only added another layer of suspicion, deepening the climate of unease surrounding Flight 171, the boy behind the lens. Overnight, Aryan Asari became known worldwide as the boy who filmed the tragedy, but within hours he faced intense scrutiny. Despite public speculation, official records and statements from his family confirmed that he was never formally arrested. He and his father were invited to the local police station to give a statement as the person who had captured the most complete visual record of the disaster. What began as a voluntary interview quickly turned into a 30-minute experience that blurred the line between witness and suspect. The interrogation was technical, precise, and entirely focused on the video. The agents pressed Aryan about why he was filming at that exact moment, whether someone had instructed him to do so, and whether he had received any prior communication suggesting he was on the roof. They demanded details about his cell phone, the model, storage capacity, and whether any external application had been used to record or transfer files. Most critically, the authorities seized his smartphone, insisting on extracting the original video file to analyze its metadata, the digital fingerprint that records the exact seconds of the recording, the device used, and any potential alterations. For a civilian witness, this level of technical scrutiny was highly unusual, suggesting that investigators were examining not only the images, but the very act of their creation. The impact on Aryan was immediate. After being released that night, he plunged into a deep state of shock, unable to sleep, fearful of official vehicles, and reluctant even to touch a phone. The pressure and suspicion surrounding the investigation exacerbated the trauma of witnessing the accident. Fearing for his mental well-being and the relentless media attention, his family acted quickly. Within 48 hours, Aryan was sent back to his native village, far from Ahmedabad, to protect him and allow for his recovery. Officially, he remained a witness. Still, the seizure of his primary device and the intensity of the interrogation left a lingering sense of distrust. Why had the state focused so intensely on a teenager and his phone? What were they looking for inside the digital code of his video? With few answers, the investigation shifted its focus from human witnesses to the cold, unforgiving evidence of the aircraft itself. The initial chaos at the accident site, the human stories of survival and loss, gave way to a more methodical, yet equally intense phase: the forensic autopsy of the machine. The focus shifted away from the streets of Nagar and moved on to hangars and laboratories, where the shattered remains of the Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, registration VTIND, were carefully reassembled like a jigsaw puzzle. It wasn't just an aircraft, it was the main witness, and its testimony was hidden in its twisted wiring, its fractured components, and the silent digital memories of its black boxes. The global aviation community watched with bated breath as this was the first fatal accident in the Dreamliner's history, placing its advanced technology and Boeing's reputation under relentless scrutiny. The official investigation, led by the Indian Bureau of Aeronautical Accident Investigation, in coordination with international agencies from the United States and the United Kingdom, began its work under enormous pressure to provide answers. The first critical breakthrough came with the recovery and analysis of the flight data recorder. The data revealed was both unequivocal and disconcerting. It showed that, seconds after takeoff, while the aircraft was climbing to an altitude of about 300 meters, a catastrophic command was triggered within its systems. Both engine fuel control switches, located on the upper cockpit panel, electronically switched from the operating position to the shut-off position. This command was equivalent to shutting off the fuel valves of the engines, depriving the two enormous General Electric GEnx turbofans of their vital source. The data stream indicated an immediate and rapid drop in engine thrust, followed by the deafening silence recorded by the cockpit voice recorder. The aircraft, now a gliding giant, managed to climb for a few more seconds, reaching a maximum altitude of just over 365 meters before succumbing to gravity. This discovery would divide the investigation into two opposing paths. Cockpit voice recorder provided the human context for this digital data, and, in doing so, created the crux of the controversy. The transcript revealed the crew's frantic final moments. The sounds of a normal takeoff were followed by the sudden and agonizing loss of engine noise. Then, the co-pilot's voice, filled with alarm and confusion, was recorded asking, "Why did you cut it off?" A moment later, the captain's reply came firmly and clearly, "I didn't do that." This four-word statement created an impossible contradiction. The switches had been flipped. Both highly trained pilots denied initiating the action. This single dialogue became the central piece of evidence around which two opposing theories solidified. Was it a catastrophic human error, or a disastrous failure of the machine itself? The investigation into the aircraft began with its history. The specific plane, manufactured in 2013, had been in service for about 11 years. Their maintenance records were thoroughly analyzed, and a critical, previously deemed non-urgent report from the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration came to light. A 2018 Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin had flagged a potential problem. Certain fuel control switches on some 787s may have been installed with their internal locking mechanisms disengaged. This was not a mandatory airworthiness directive, but an inspection recommendation. Records confirmed that Air India, following the non-mandatory nature of the notice, did not carry out this specific inspection on VTIND. This finding lent weight to the theory of a systemic failure. Could a severe vibration or electrical failure have caused mechanically compromised switches to physically shift to the off position on their own, without any human intervention? Proponents of this theory pointed to the extreme improbability of both pilots, at a critical stage of flight, simultaneously and mistakenly manipulating two separate protected switches. However, the human error theory also presented compelling arguments. Skeptics of the mechanical failure hypothesis questioned how a vibration could move two independent, latch-on switches in perfect synchrony, and, according to some interpretations of the data, cause them to return to a neutral position. They highlighted the complex and stressful environment of the cockpit, suggesting the possibility of an inadvertent action, immediately regretted, which the human mind, under severe stress, might later deny. The Indian Pilots Association vigorously contested this narrative, issuing statements questioning the integrity of the investigation and accusing the authorities of using the deceased crew as a scapegoat, since they were unable to defend themselves. They demanded to know why the full context of the cockpit conversation had not been released, suggesting that the term "cut" might refer to something other than the fuel switches. The debate did not take place in public, but in closed meeting rooms and in leaked technical reports. The official investigation was now walking a tightrope. The initial narrative, focused on a known failure and a tragic convergence of events, was plausible, but incomplete. The pilot's final enigmatic words suggested they were battling a ghost within the machine, something in the wiring they didn't understand. This line of investigation led experts to look deeper into the aircraft's past, to earlier, seemingly mundane moments that, in retrospect, might have been the first whispers of the approaching catastrophe. The search for the truth took them away from the moment of impact and back in time to the final pre-flight checks and the possibility that the crew was already aware of a problem long before the aircraft left the gate. The official investigation into Air India Flight 171 had reached a critical point. The impasse between a catastrophic systemic failure and an unthinkable human error remained, with evidence and expert opinions divided on opposite sides. However, the answer to this impasse lay not in the wreckage of the present, but in the echoes of the past, hidden in the complete and uncut transcript of the cockpit voice recorder. While the world focused on the final, desperate exchange, investigators analyzed every syllable from the checklist. Pre-flight. It was there, in the routine conversations and technical dialogue of the crew, that they discovered an enigmatic comment that would redefine the entire investigation and suggest that the pilots were aware of a problem long before the aircraft left the gate. The transcript revealed that, about 20 minutes before takeoff, during the initial cockpit preparation, the captain made a seemingly trivial observation. His voice, calm and professional, mentioned a technical detail. He stated that a certain tremor had returned on panel 4, but the co-pilot replied to ignore it, as it had already been recorded. It was a brief, almost banal exchange, the kind that happens daily in cockpits around the world when sophisticated machines exhibit small, inexplicable anomalies. But, in light of what followed, those few words took on enormous weight. They were not a declaration of emergency. They were a silent confirmation of a known and recurring problem, a ghost in the machine. The term tremor was not defined in the transcript. Still, within the complex electrical architecture of a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, it could refer to a transient voltage fluctuation, an intermittent sensor failure, or unexplained power consumption in one of the aircraft's many digital buses. The fact that it had returned indicated that this was not an isolated event, but a persistent and undocumented anomaly that the crew had encountered before. This discovery led investigators to revisit the aircraft's maintenance records with a new and specific focus. They were looking for any record of unexplained voltage fluctuations or electrical transients on the panel mentioned by the captain. The official VTIND records showed nothing beyond routine maintenance and minor issues resolved. No entry directly corresponded to the commander's observations. This absence, in itself, was of enormous significance. She suggested one of two possibilities. Either the problem was considered so minor and intermittent that it was never formally documented, or there was a cultural or procedural flaw where small defects were informally noted, but not escalated through the appropriate maintenance channels. This opened a disturbing new line of inquiry into Air India's maintenance culture, in which the pressure to maintain punctuality could, even unconsciously, lead to the neglect of critical failures at an early stage. This revelation fundamentally altered the understanding of the pilot's final moments. The phrase, "I didn't do it," ceased to be merely the denial of a physical action. It could also be the desperate refutation of an automated system behaving erratically. If a voltage spike or electrical fault could cause the fuel control switches to move to the cutoff position on their own, then the pilots weren't dealing with a simple mechanical failure. They were battling a ghost in the wiring, a command initiated by the aircraft's own systems, which they couldn't predict or understand. The story evolved from a tragedy caused by a single switch to a warning about the limits of automated systems and the dangers of ignoring the persistent whispers of a machine in distress. But just as this new narrative was gaining traction, a separate and equally intriguing piece of evidence emerged from a completely different source, pointing not to an internal failure, but to a possible external threat to the aircraft. The mystery of Flight 171 was about to expand into the vast airspace around it. The answers to modern tragedies often reside in the ghosts of ancient ones. 29 years earlier, another Boeing had fallen from the sky. It was TWA Flight 800, and its shadow still haunts every unexplained explosion since then. To understand the possible future of Air India Flight 171, one must first go back to the summer of 1996, when that aircraft fell from a clear sky, taking with it 230 lives and the certainty of what really happened. On the night of July 17, 1996, the weather was calm and clear over the Atlantic Ocean, near East Mauritius, New York. Aboard TWA Flight 800, a Boeing 747 bound for Paris, the atmosphere was calm as the aircraft climbed after leaving John F. Kennedy International Airport. Then, at approximately 8:31 p.m., just 12 minutes after takeoff, the unthinkable happened. The aircraft, a symbol of American aviation power, suddenly disappeared from air traffic control radar. For the hundreds of witnesses on the beaches and boats below, the event was horrifyingly visible. A sudden flash at twilight, followed by an arcing trail of fire, described by many as a flare or firework, that seemed to rise toward the sky before being engulfed by a much larger catastrophic explosion. The large jet broke apart in mid-air, scattering debris across the ocean. There was no distress call, no warning. All 230 passengers and crew died instantly, their lives extinguished in a public spectacle that was immediately etched into the national memory. The official investigation, led by the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, was launched on an unprecedented scale and with determination. It became a 4-year effort, costing approximately $40 million, and was one of the most complex in history. Investigators faced the monumental task of recovering the wreckage from the ocean floor, a meticulous process that involved reassembling the fuselage fragments in a hangar. The official conclusion, presented in the final report of August 2002, attributed the tragedy to a mechanical failure. According to investigators, the probable cause was the explosion of the central wing fuel tank, triggered by a short circuit in the wiring running inside it. The tank, almost empty, was heated by the air conditioning units positioned directly below, on a very hot day, creating a highly volatile mixture of fuel vapors and air. A single spark would have been enough to cause the explosion. This understanding led to important changes in global safety standards, such as the adoption of fuel tank inerting systems, a concrete legacy to prevent something similar from happening again. Despite the technical detail of the report, the official version never managed to silence a powerful and persistent alternative narrative. From the beginning, many contested the mechanical failure hypothesis and maintained that the aircraft had been hit by a missile. This theory did not originate from isolated rumors, but from the consistent testimony of hundreds of people considered reliable. Pilots, police officers, and military personnel reported seeing a luminous trail rising from the ground towards the plane moments before the explosion. The strength of these testimonies was such that it led the FBI to open a parallel criminal investigation, evaluating the possibility of terrorism or a military accident. Although the investigation was closed after 16 months without evidence of a crime, the doubt was already deeply rooted. Over time, critics, including former members of the official investigation team itself, came forward accusing the authorities of ignoring or suppressing relevant evidence. They pointed to anomalies in radar records, residue found on the victim's clothing, and the specific pattern of debris dispersal as signs of an external impact. For these critics, the explanation of a spark in the tank was a convenient solution, intended to avoid a major political and military scandal. It is in this context that the connection to Air India Flight 171 becomes evident. Both tragedies involve modern Boeing aircraft that met catastrophic ends shortly after takeoff, and whose investigations quickly turned into battlegrounds between competing theories. In the case of TWA Flight 800, the debate was between a fuel tank explosion and the missile hypothesis. In Air India Flight 171, the dispute revolves around human error and a possible systemic electrical failure. In both cases, the official explanations were technically plausible, but complex from a forensic point of view, which fueled resistance from both the public and experts. In both cases, the families of the victims were trapped in a labyrinth of contradictory information, their grief compounded by uncertainty about what truly caused the deaths of their loved ones. The case of TWA Flight 800 showed that not even the most extensive and expensive investigation can dispel the shadow of doubt, when alternative theories are emotionally compelling and supported by evidence considered credible. It became a case without a definitive conclusion, not for lack of effort, but because the evidence came to be interpreted in radically different ways. Given this, the inevitable question remains. With fragmented evidence, disagreeing experts, and more questions than answers, will Air India Flight 171 follow the same path and become the next TWA Flight 800? A tragedy marked not by what is known for sure, but by what may never be proven.